A very warm welcome to our Data Science in the News series. It's a special Australian Census edition, and this is jointly hosted by the Queensland Academy of Arts and Science and Queensland University and Technology Centre for Data Science. And my name's David Lovell, and I'm the Deputy Director of QUT's Centre for Data Science. Now, even though we're all meeting online, we're all standing on the lands of Australia's First Nations owners, and I would like to acknowledge in particular the Turrbal and the Yugara as the First Nations owners of the lands where QUT now stands, and pay respect to their elders, laws, customs and creation spirits. Recognise that these lands have always been places of teaching, research and learning, and acknowledge the important role that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people play within the QUT community and within all our communities. I also want to acknowledge that right now there are people facing challenging situations, and I know some of our panellists are at the moment because of the restrictions and ongoing difficulties with the COVID pandemic. Wherever you are, we hope that things are improving. We wish you health and safety in these tough times. And look, personally, I hope this next hour is going to be mood elevating for all of us. It's always nice to end the week on a high, and we have a super fascinating topic to discuss here today because a few weeks ago, we all lodged information with the Australian Bureau of Statistics for the 2021 census. Yeah, we all did that. I hope we did. If you didn't, I'm told by my friends Caroline and Mark that you still can. That's right, isn't it, Caroline, Mark? Yeah, getting nods there. All right, but do it after this webinar, not right now, because this is powerful stuff. So you can still fill your census in, and please do if you've not done so already. Now, as a data scientist, I'm really pretty excited by the census. It gives us a snapshot of the state of the nation every 4 or most recently 5 years. And that snapshot is really important because it informs a tremendous breadth of decision making. It's a massive undertaking. It's a major investment of time and effort, but the dividends that it yields to the Australian public are significant. And the world and its nations are complex and dynamic, and a national census gives a country like Australia incredibly valuable insight how to navigate that dynamic complexity. So today, we're going to hear from and talk with 4 experts, each of whom will be sharing their insights into the Australian census and government statistics more broadly, thinking about things that inform a broad spectrum of decisions by government, industry, communities and citizens. We have from the Australian Bureau of Statistics, Mr. Mark Harding, Program Manager of the 2021 Census Data Operations. Mark, how are you doing?
Very well, thank you, David.
Good, welcome aboard. I'm delighted that we also have from the ABS, Ms. Caroline Deans, Director of 2021 Census Dissemination. Caroline, I hope you're well today.
Hi, David. Yes, I am. Thank you.
That's great. I'm delighted that we have from QUT, Associate Professor Gentry White from the Centre for Data Science and Chair of Government Statistics here at QUT. How are you doing, Gentry?
Good.
Great. And Aidan Price, who is actually working with a whole range of interesting statistical information from the ABS and other sources on the AusN Health project. Aidan, how are you doing?
Yeah, good, thanks, mate.
Fantastic. Welcome, everybody. Each of our experts will give us a 6 or 7 minute glimpse into the census and the world of national statistics. And while they're doing that, you, listeners, can use the Q&A channel on Zoom to raise even more thought-provoking questions. And in the latter half of our time together, I'll put these questions to our expert panel and look forward very much to hearing their insights. So let's get started. Mark, welcome. You are our first speaker from the ABS and Program Manager of 2021 Census Data Operations. So I'll make no secret of my affection and admiration for the ABS. To me, it's like an Australian icon like the ABC, and I'm grateful to you and Caroline and all of the dedicated staff for what the Bureau does. But tell me, as an ABS staff member, do you feel that love?
Yes and no, let's say. We certainly feel it. I'll go to a barbecue And over a sausage, I'll be talking to some people and they'll say, where do you work? And I'll say the Australian Bureau of Statistics, and they'll very quickly move away and talk to someone else. And I'll talk to
No.
other people and they'll be absolutely fascinated and want to ask me all sorts of questions and everything. So there are, as we say in all walks, and very inaccurately, there are two types of people in this world. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, you're amongst the right type of people. Mark, I'm really curious to hear what you have to share with us. Do you have some slides that you'd like to share?
Caroline is going to help out by running those. So I think she'll be putting them up now. And
okay. Yep, they come through beautifully. All right.
They have.
To you.
No, thank you. They have come through beautifully. They've also gone into full screen mode and hidden my speaker notes. So I'm just adjusting that now and then I'll be off and running.
I think let's use this moment to pause and make a shout out to Zoom. Please, can you redesign the interface so that every time we do something, things stay in the same place? I'm always losing stuff. Have you found your speaker notes?
I'm good to go. Thank you.
All right, the floor's yours, Mark.
Thank you. Now, we might just skip through this one immediately. I would love to talk about the census all day, but I know I've got to stick to 5 to 7 minutes. And so I am really talking about the what here. David's already given a very warm and affectionate intro of what the census is and that. So I think I can skip through the next couple of slides as well and really get to, we obviously run this as a snapshot. We're finding out all about the lives of people in Australia and Australian society and how it changes over time. That's what we're doing, and we're reaching every single dwelling in Australia. So that's the goal of the census, and to get that information. So moving on to really talking about what is new in this census, and it's obviously a very new environment that we've been in this census that we weren't anticipating in 2016 when we were planning ahead for what was next. Having said that, the basic approach was the same. All the things in that green box there, really following up with our mail out. We prefer people to use the digital option in spite of what happened in 2016. We still prefer people to use the digital option. That was the way we knew we needed to invest and continue with. We do make paper available to who wants it, and we do an extensive field follow-up afterwards to try and chase all the responses we can across Australia. We do have a number of new features in place, and they have proven to be very important. Some of them have been used in ways we weren't anticipating when we were designing them, and I'm going to highlight a few of those in particular in terms of, mainly in terms of the COVID impacts around the country at the time we were taking the census and how useful that became. So I will move on to the next slide and just say that we obviously had a COVID safe plan. Everybody's got to have a COVID safe plan of some sort, and we are no different. We have people traveling around the country. We have people based around the country already in our different offices, and we were effectively hitting the streets and wanting to follow up response. So we knew we were going to be pushing into, territory where we needed to make sure we were approaching it right. What we effectively did was, knowing about this last year and COVID being in play for a while now, we were running a major test in 2020. So we tested our COVID safe plans. Melbourne happened to be in lockdown at the time when we were running our test, and we were able to do a lot of the testing around what works, what has an effect and what doesn't. So we did test what we call our step down approach, where we move from being able to make close contact with people and knock on doors to more of a casual contact where we're able to approach letterboxes or be out there and do different things, but not really approach doors and interact with people, through to contactless. So what can we do in a completely contactless environment, as we've seen in parts of Sydney and a number of other parts around Australia? That step down approach we were very confident in. We could do something, we could continue ahead with running a census, but we still didn't foresee probably the extent of the lockdowns that we'd be in and the way things would move in, because things were looking pretty good back in 2020 and even early 2021, but things got more difficult as we got closer to the census. So it's certainly, COVID did mean some things for us. Just to cover off on that, it did impact our recruitment efforts, and for our field force, it did impact our ability to move people around the country. Certainly impacts anywhere where there's state borders between areas, where we'd hired people in one state and couldn't now move them to the other state to do the work they were going to do. So Australia is not all nice and neat. We do go to the borders and go to the areas in between, and it made it hard for us to do the logistics around a lot of those. Not being able to contact at the front door hampers our ability to drop off forms, drop off login codes, interact with people and chase completed forms. And it also really did impact our field work in terms of a really important aspect, which is determining occupancy. It might sound really boring or basic, but our denominator is based on knowing how many occupied dwellings there are in Australia, not just how many houses there are. We do have, take stock of that elsewhere in the ABS, but really we're talking here about the occupied dwellings, and not being able to eyeball that where we are unsure has been an issue that we've needed to overcome. And that's occupied on census night, not just talking about long-term vacant dwellings or other things, but was there anyone there on census night is really what we're talking about. So if we know a house was occupied and we don't get a response, then we need to impute data for that house to make sure that the whole data set is robust and has all the information. And conversely, we definitely don't want to impute data for unoccupied dwellings, then we end up with an overcount. So occupancy determination is really important to our overall quality outcomes. And that's just setting up what I'm going to talk about in the next slide, which I am going to focus on for my part of this presentation. And Caroline will talk more about the data outcomes and journey. But from what I'll talk about here is that we did get a really big save in this census from our digital service. And it brings me great joy to say that after 2016. And I'm happy to say that loudly, that hashtag census save, I'll call it, from our digital form, online form, and the broader digital service that we had, being able to reach the public effectively without making contact in a number of areas. So a few things I just want to highlight. One is landing a login code in letterboxes across the country, pushing a response window that started from the 23rd of July rather than focusing just around census night, which was the 10th of August, meant that people could respond as they received their login code. And this brought in a lot of forms early, got us off to a great start, and meant we could really tailor more where our field response was going to need to be from an earlier time. We always get a lot of response on census day. That's how it works. But this time around, we actually had as many responses come in before census day than we'd had after census day in 2016. So we did see the people respond well to that new way of doing it. Not only, and I'll just quickly make a point around quality, we still referenced census night and people to fill it out for census night. We just gave a longer window of response for people to respond. So not only could people fill it out earlier, but we could also make dynamic updates to the support information in the online form and on the website. So having people, channeling more people through an online form and having more people using that form meant that we could actually tell them, well, and we for example, could provide guidance and did provide guidance and a bit more clarity around filling out certain questions on the census if you're in lockdown and things like that, which weren't used by all that many people probably, but for people who were confused, they could get that clarity even from within twisties in the online form. And so by comparison, the paper form had to be locked down 12 months before census night for printing, very inflexible, doesn't offer that same dynamic ability to see the future and know how we're going to need to inform the nation on how to fill out our census. So overall for the census, we took a user-centered design approach and we used behavioural economics, really looking through the citizen eyes, pulling the complexity into the organisation and making it simple for people to do. And that led to a range of self-service options. I'll just quickly mention two of them that were really important. One of them was logging in without a code. So where we couldn't even get to an area to drop a letter or a form or mail something that we could be guaranteed would get there because of poor mail, our mail register wasn't accurate or whatever else, we could still put out comms messages and say, you can log in without a phone, without a code. You just need a mobile phone, proof that you're there, give us the address and we'll enable you to do it. So that was a real save for us in terms of getting everywhere in the country contactless. And also we have what's called a zero stream where people could actually report through the form, no one was home on census night. Previously, we'd make those people call us because we wanted to verify that. This time we allowed people to do it with a little bit of a jump and making sure that they put in some information if we did need to follow them up. So just some quality checks there, but allowing people just to tell us this house was unoccupied. And we've done a range of things around that sort of occupancy challenge as well. But I just wanted to, I guess, focus here on enabling the population to give us the information they wanted to give as easily as possible was a really helpful thing, certainly when you're in a pandemic and in those contactless ways. There's lots of other things I could go on about, but I think my time is up, David, so I'll end it there.
No, that's great. And the thing is, we know that there's a real depth and breadth of things to cover and really looking forward to those things coming out in the panel conversation. Just one quick question though. It's a little bit like a rocket launch. You know, you've got a date where things are going to get sent off. How much wiggle room when does the wiggle room about the actual date of census night vanish? Like, you know, August 10, when is that decided? Is it always August 10? Why is it August 10?
It's always that around that date and a Tuesday night in. It's always Tuesday night, isn't it, Caroline? I'm going to check. Yep, she's nodding good. I don't want to say the wrong thing here, but it's always a Tuesday night at that point in winter, and it's really centered around how many people are more likely to be at home. And we got that exactly right this time because of all the lockdowns. We really picked a time when most people would be at home, but usually it's about less people are traveling around the country on summer holidays and things like that. So it just makes the census easier and catches people in their home.
Yeah. Yeah, okay, look, that's great. I just remind everyone who's online, if you've got questions for Mark, Caroline, Gentry, Aidan, any of us, please shoot them in via the Q&A channel. It gives me real pleasure now to welcome the second of our speakers from the Australian Bureau of Statistics today, Ms. Caroline Deans, who's Director of the 2021 Census Dissemination. Caroline, I struggle to get a bulk email out to colleagues without making some kind of mistakes and recalling things. So I really stand in awe of what you and the team have done. This is your fourth census? How many censuses have you been through?
This is my third census. So back in 2011, that was my first. I was down in Adelaide and was responsible for the South Australian operations. In 2016, I moved up to Brisbane, was responsible for Queensland, and now I've been in a different role. I was responsible for developing the form this time. So coming up with the questions that are on the form, there's new questions on the form this time. That's been my work over the last few years. And finally, I get to see what I think is the really exciting part of the census, and that is releasing the data. So I'm now in the dissemination, and for most of the census program, the work's finished. They can celebrate and say they're done. We're just starting to get the data. So we're now going to start getting busy as the data flows through to us.
Yeah, I'm guessing that at different phases of time, there are different groups of people will be biting their nails or heaving sighs of relief, and that's going to change as things move forward in time, yeah?
It absolutely does, yeah, and it's our turn now.
All right, well, look, I'm really curious to hear what you have to share with us, Caroline, so over to you.
Great, thank you, David. Well, what I'm going to talk about is who uses the data, and then I'm going to go into the journey of the data. So where it goes from the point that you all filled in your form a few weeks ago to actually releasing that valuable data in about 10 months' time. So let me... I've lost, oh good, that worked. I've lost my button on the screen with the way my thing minimized, but anyway, that's fine. So I think we often know about the government users of census data. So there are a number of official purposes that census data is put to, and that's things like allocation of government funding. So the GST distribution from the Commonwealth government through to the states, territories and local governments, that's determined by census data. The electoral boundaries, when they're redefined, that's based on census data. And we also know that a lot of government departments make their policy, they help inform their service delivery with census data. And they're all really great, important uses of census data. But I did want to highlight some of the other uses that perhaps people don't always think about. And I've got a couple of organisations up there. One that people dialing in from Queensland might be familiar with is the charity group Orange Sky Laundry, started in Brisbane several years ago. And that organisation provides mobile laundry services, showers, but most importantly, an opportunity to sit and have a chat for people who are experiencing homelessness. You see the picture on the screen, there's the orange chairs. They pull up with the washing machines and the chairs, and there's volunteers that sit there and have a chat and connect with people experiencing homelessness. And they've been using census data to understand where people are in need of their service, because census is the best source of homelessness data in the country. So they're one organisation who uses census data. Also helping out more or less advantaged people, Curtin University have a program that's called Uni Ready, and that's to help educationally disadvantaged students apply for a pathways program to get them into university. And what they've done is they use census data to understand a range of factors that contribute to educational disadvantage. So when they then receive the thousands of applications that they get in for that Uni Ready program, they can take a more holistic approach to reviewing the applications to make sure the most worthy or the most in need students are able to actually get in and study at university. And I think that's a great program too. And the final one that I'll touch on, I'm sure we all know it, the Royal Flying Doctor Services, delivering really important health services out in those remote parts of Australia, and probably really well used across Queensland. And they also have used census data to plan where and when their services are needed. And they help over 1,000 people every day. And that's by understanding where that population is. So they're three cases, and we featured those in our communications campaign about users of 2016 census data. And the heading of that slide is "Every Stat Tells a Story." And that's been our campaign tagline for the 2021 census, "Every Stat Tells a Story." So now I'll take us through how we get to those stories. So this is a very simplified version of what we're going to be doing over the next year or so. If you start on the left of the screen, field operations, that's when we had collectors out and about, filling in the survey form, or more likely people going online. And that's when every person in Australia had the opportunity to fill in their census form. That then comes through to us. We then receive more than 7.5 million forms online, and more than 2 million paper forms we receive. And Mark mentioned earlier the unoccupied dwellings, there are probably about 1 million unoccupied dwellings around the country. So that data is now coming through to us. And down in Dandenong in Victoria, we've got a facility there where Australia Post is delivering truckloads of paper forms. It's probably trickling, flowing to a trickle now, but has been delivering massive loads of paper down to Dandenong to be scanned and captured. And if you think about people's handwriting, there's a little bit of work often required to repair that, and even just feeding all of those forms into a scanner using optical character recognition and just getting that paper data into digital form. It then moves into the next phase, which is our data load and transformation. And that's when we take that response data and we start turning it into something that actually looks like output data, that actually looks like the variable that data scientists are playing with, that you're conducting your analysis on. And so on your census form, there's about 60 questions. And from that, we produce nearly 200 output variables. We combine them in various different ways to add the most value for analysis out of 60 questions. Coding's the next stage, and that is another massive operation that involves about 650 people. If you think about some of the questions on the census form, we had to write in text. A lot of it is checkbox, which makes it easier to process, but there are quite a number, like writing in your address, your industry, your occupation, some of the cultural diversity questions around where you were born or your religious affiliation, your education. A lot of that, we've got great processes in place to do it automatically, but a bunch of those have to hit the coding floor. And that's where we've got 650 people that are trying to determine if you write in a particular description of your occupation. Well, according to ANSCO, the classification of what occupation are you working on. Then we move on to imputation. And Mark referred to that earlier. Imputation I'll define as a statistically valid best guess at who might be in that dwelling. We only impute 4 variables, and that's age, sex, marital status, and usual residence. And we do that both in the case of when we receive a form from someone that doesn't have those variables on it, so we can impute those variables onto that form, or in the cases where we've identified what we think is an occupied dwelling, but we didn't get a response from that dwelling on on census night. And then finally, we get to my piece of the puzzle in dissemination. And I'm really lucky that I get a massive Christmas present from my teams upstream in coding and processing, because on December 23, they're going to deliver me some data. And that's when we start doing our work in dissemination. And that's when we package all that massive unit record file into aggregate data that can be used by everyone who's going to start playing with census data next year. And the yellow band across the top is just saying, obviously, we do data assurance and quality assurance all along the way. And I will just finish by briefly talking about our release plans. It's going to be much the same as the 2016 census. So we've got the same range of products available, quick stats, nice web-friendly, easy to use summaries of data for a region, spreadsheet form, table builders where you can build your own tables. We will be releasing next month our first look at the census, and that will be with the release of our reference material with the dictionary. So that will be going out with all the variables that you'll expect to see in the census data next year. And then the actual data starts being released from June next year. And we've got 2 new questions on the census, the health question and service with the Australian Defence Force. They'll be released in June, along with a really broad range of data around cultural diversity, the demographics and so on. October next year sees the release of some of the more complex data. And this will be really interesting, because I think this is the release where we are going to see more COVID impact. So this is when we see the occupation and industry labour force data. We see internal migration. Where have people moved over? Where they lived 1 year ago? Where they lived 5 years ago? How did they get to work or didn't go to work from home? So that's all second release next year. And then we keep feeding data out through into 2023. So it's a long journey ahead, but hopefully that's a bit of an overview of what the ABS does to get the data to you in about 10 months' time.
That's fantastic. Do you make a special submission to Santa Claus just before all that data arrives? What do you want for Christmas to help you cope with that data?
Good quality data that's been robustly assured, yes, in a nice form. And I don't think Mark mentioned it, but we did have a test last year. So we've had a practice run at Christmas already. So we have already seen some test data come through. So we know that when we start getting that big data load at Christmas time, that our systems are set up ready to go. And hopefully there aren't any surprises and I can have Christmas Day and a few more days off.
Yeah, let's hope so. Can you just go a couple of slides back, Caroline, because I knew we'd encounter some terminology that would be interesting, but there's a particular phrase. It's all right, just in this, just if you roll back in the view that you've got, is fine. It's just in one of those, not that one, yeah. In there.
That one? Yeah.
All right. 2 words or 2 phrases I hadn't expected to see today. One was guillotining, but I'm guessing that's got something to do with paper. And the other one is, but what is form grooming, for goodness sake?
I might get Mark to talk about that. I understand it's just taking the paper out of the envelope and smoothing it out and feeding it into a scanner.
In order for the forms to go through the scanners, they need the spines guillotined, and so they're all separate pages, and they need to be appropriately stacked and ready and smooth and all of those things. And where they're not going to go through our scanner, they need to be separated out for manual effort.
I get you. It's a little bit like horse whispering, but anyway, form grooming. Thank you, Caroline, very much for that. That's just an amazing insight. And it now gives me great pleasure to be welcoming my colleague, Gentry White, who's an associate professor in data science and also the ABS co-chair in the QUT Centre for Data Science. I really always enjoyed talking with Gentry because he's very thoughtful, very knowledgeable, very straight talking. And during yesterday's practice run, you enlightened me, Gentry, about the fundamental role of the census in the history of computing and statistics. Yeah. And you also described government statistics as the cornerstone of democracy and civilized society. Yeah. So today from you, we're going to hear a little bit about partnerships between academia and institutions like the ABS. So the floor is yours.
Right. So yes. So I am the I am the co-chair in government statistics and the associate professor in data science at the QUT Center for Data Science. So this is a bit of a unique thing, and it's actually a really nice thing. So I do want to explain the details of that a little bit. So this is a jointly funded position. It's funded by both QUT and the Australian Bureau of Statistics. And it's, like you said, I'm a co-chair, which means there's another co-chair who is an employee named Dr. Bernadette Giuffrida from the ABS. She is seconded to this position. And so we share duties, we work together in a partnership. One of the biggest things we're doing, we're pursuing basically some of the strategic goals in data science that the ABS has. And part of this, from our perspective as a university, is we get 3 fully funded PhD scholarships. So these are students who are pursuing a PhD, working on relevant academic problems, but also problems that are motivated and strongly associated with the Australian Bureau of Statistics, things that they are very much interested in getting some more advanced solutions to. And so they're kind of unique. They're not, because they're kind of an industry-sponsored PhD, so they're very applied, very practical, but still very academic in nature. So, what are so you think about, what are the benefits for industry or government agency like this partnering with an academic institution? The most immediate benefit is the ABS gets access to expert knowledge, insight, training opportunities, and things like that. And of course, we as a university, we get money, basically. And we get money to fund for students and to fund research and things like this. Strategically speaking, the benefits run a little bit deeper here. So as I was sort of talking about in the meeting yesterday, data science is pushing the boundary of what we can do with data. It's building almost a quantum leap over what we think of as traditional statistical inference. It's things like machine learning, artificial intelligence, deep learning, deep neural networks, all these very sophisticated models that are doing things with data that we wouldn't have thought to do or been able to do. And that's really, it's the confluence of increased computing capabilities, increased computer science knowledge, and the ability to collect and maintain and curate extremely large data sets. And as is the case, anytime you start pushing a boundary, you run into both very good opportunities for advancing knowledge and capabilities, but you also run into a lot of risks. So what Bernadette and I have always talked about is this idea of trying to advance this knowledge and the capabilities for the ABS in a responsible way, and I'll get to why that's important. And so this is where I'm going to go put my social scientist hat on, where I say that public statistics and the ABS really are crucial to a healthy modern democracy. And I would say filling out that census form is as important as voting in an election. And this is because, and like I said, I'll get my social science hat on. Legitimacy is derived from transparency, okay? So we as citizens in a society cannot make good decisions either as an individual or collectively without having good information. The other thing we can't do is we can't hold our government accountable if we don't have good information, if we don't know what they're doing. So a lot of times this is, they talk about this is the totalitarian's number one play in the playbook of running a dictatorship is controlling access to information. And a lot of times the focus of that is, freedom of the press. They have to have a free press. They have to have, good reporting and access to media. But that's only one part of the puzzle. The other part of the puzzle is government statistics, the official data that is collected and maintained by the government. That has to be shared openly, transparently. It has to be made available to the public. And to the policymakers in a way to which they can use it to make good decisions. So, like I said, so the ABS is basically makes it, as Mark was saying, at cocktail parties, when you may tell people you work for the ABS and they find a spot on your forehead to stare at briefly as they decide they've got to get someplace else very urgently. No, but this is a very, very important role. It can seem a bit mundane and banal, but it is a very important role. And it's a very difficult job in a lot of ways. But basically, without access to good information, you cannot have a healthy functioning democracy. You can't hold the government accountable. You can't make good decisions. So when we talk about that, like I said, where this gets into sort of this idea of legitimacy and transparency, the challenge of sort of these new boundaries in data science and machine learning is that we have to bring integrity, or talk about integrity in the data sciences. Okay, so we have to pay attention to things like, what are the ethical, moral obligations around using data, which is a hot topic right now in machine learning, is ethical machine learning, ethical data science. But beyond that, actually, you also have to have the two pieces of the puzzle are the explainability, which is where transparency comes in. You have to be able to explain how this technology that you're using works. Otherwise, it's magic. Okay, and that's a hard sell sometimes. The other thing you have to do is you have to be able to quantify the uncertainty that is involved in the process of using these different technologies, because there is uncertainty. These are not perfect. There's always uncertainty. So you have to be able to communicate that clearly. And these are all go towards this goal of transparency in government and transparency in how the process works. And without transparency, you can't have legitimacy and public trust, which is like I said, vital to things. And I think that's my last slide, so I can get off my soapbox now.
No, that's great. That's wonderful, Gentry. One of the things I love about working with you is you got this really strong moral compass, and you remind us like what is important. Because I think it is easy in statistics and data science to become hypnotized or so embroiled in the details that you lose sight of these broader motivations.
Well, I always like to tell this story that at the beginning of the 20th century, when X-ray technology was developed and they started taking X-rays of people, medical doctors noticed that the internal organs weren't where they were supposed to be. So they started planning all these operations to rearrange people's organs to get them arranged correctly. What they didn't realize till later on was that all their knowledge about human anatomy had come from dissecting bodies that were laying horizontally out on a table. And it was quite natural that organs moved when you stood up and moved around. So, there's always a danger in taking any new technology and just sort of grabbing onto new is better, must be better than the old way. This is perfect. And we don't, you've got to be very careful about these things, because you can really, really get yourself in a mess.
Yeah, no, look, I agree entirely. We might circle back to some of the other issues that you talked on about transparency and openness. But for the time being, Gentry, thanks for a wonderful and very inspiring insight.
Yep.
And we're at our final panelist who just rounds things out really beautifully because he's got firsthand experience of putting the ABS data to good use. How are you, Aidan? You well?
Yeah, I'm doing great. And these talks are all really good. I think there are a bunch of questions that I've got penciled down, so it'll be good.
Well, this is where you get to give Mark and Caroline the sort of direct feedback as a panelist. Here's how I found using your data. But yeah, I'm really keen to hear what you have been doing with the data with Oz and Health. So please, the floor is yours.
Great. I hope my color scheming isn't too distracting. I've just gone all out. I change it pretty much every slide, so get ready for that. So I'm Aidan. I'm working on Oz and Health, which is a great platform utilizing environmental health data and census data or demographics data to assess vulnerability and hopefully to inform policymakers of areas that they can intervene or act in terms of both climate and air quality based vulnerability in populations. So I couldn't very well give a talk on the work that I'm doing without discussing the partners that we work with. There are a lot of them. It's a multi-agency funded project, and all of them have an equal part in directing us, giving us feedback or advice for how we proceed, reviewing our methodology, etc. Before I go too much further in, though, I'll just note specifically what environmental health means in the lens of AusEd Health. So it's a nice note to clarify, because it's a bit of a misleading term, but it's how the environment impacts human health. So that's the kind of motivation behind this idea of heat impacting, human health, or air quality impacting human health, rather than the health of the environment itself. Great. So I touched on it a little already, but our idea is to be able to provide a resource to policymakers, ideally, but it's also to the general public to help inform them on changes in population and also vulnerabilities in population. So there's currently not a platform that enables this kind of work. There are vulnerability indices, and there are, assessments and papers and research that aim toward this kind of goal. But yeah, AusEd Health aims to take that to a visual platform to, enable some easy insights and digestibility to some of this assessment. So I'll touch a little bit on data, because that's pretty much why we're here. We had a data audit as part of the AusEd Health project, and that started out more or less through a literature review. We just assessed what other people had done when they're assessing vulnerability, especially in relation to environmental health, and then kind of webbing out from there. And there are an insane depth of resources and data sources for environmental health data, population data, especially when you crawl internationally and you see the different pockets of, census or, similar style surveys that people have collected. Ultimately, we have a national focus, so we settled on a few key data sources that are pretty well known. The first one nicely there is ABS, which of course we'll talk about a little more. We sourced Copernicus estimates for air quality data. We're working with the Centre for Air Pollution, Energy and Health Research for some air quality data as well, especially for some insight. And then BOM, which is the mainstay for Australian climate data, some Terra Modis data for assessing canopy cover or vegetation, and the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare for health outcome data. So I guess this is a nice application. You can draw comparisons between Orange Sky or Curtin or the Flying Doctors, that we use all sorts of data to get our points across. Great, but as I said, the main one is population data. So we've got our three kind of tiered system here that we use to create vulnerability. I've just got the cameras up, so I'm constantly readjusting it. I'm sorry if you see my cursor. But the idea is that we want to take all of these sorts of data and combine them. We're doing this by using a framework which was introduced in 2007 by the IPCC, who most people know quite recently because of the climate change disaster that was more or less announced in their recent reporting. But this system has three separate components. Exposure, I've listed there, is the contact between a system and the climate. So how the climate is impacting, I guess, humans or the population. So this is just like temperature or heat waves specifically. Sensitivity, which is a general hallmark of how vulnerable a population is. So this is where we'll see a lot of the ABS parameters. And then adaptive capacity, which is a population's ability to, be resilient against changes or extremes. And you can see here, we've got our nice simple equation. Once we've put all the data together in ways that are so secret that you'll have to look at them when we make them public, or any of the other vulnerability literature, but I won't go into it. And then we spit out a single vulnerability index that people can use to assess in a broad sense how vulnerable a population is with respect to our two main areas of climate and air quality. So here's some of our data. I spoke kind of through it before, but you can kind of get an idea of what we're working with by looking at these. So we've got three indices, heat, a cold, and an air quality index, each representing vulnerability. And you can see some of our perhaps not ABS data here, although our social connectedness theme at the end of adaptive capacity has some ABS parameters. So contrast that with the next slide, which is our sensitivity, which is entirely made up of ABS parameters with a tiny little showing from the National Health Survey at the bottom. So we utilize a lot of ABS parameters. There are some more or some less here that we have considered based on literature. There are some more or less that we might consider in future phases of the Ozone Health project as well. Great. So in terms of what we do with that data when we've combined it all, we want to be able to visualize it. I've got two examples here that I won't go into too much detail in. The first is the Australian Cancer Atlas, which was developed, I guess, or led by Kerry Mengerson, who's a distinguished professor at QUT. And this just displays all of the kind of diagnoses of different cancers on a map, which you can zoom into, look at different statistics about, do some comparisons. It's an amazing tool, and it's kind of what we'd like to emulate. And there are many examples of this kind of thing. I'll show one more. This is the FIDO Social Health Atlas. It collects all sorts of Australian data and, of course, puts them on a map as well. And you can see that they have, tabulated data. You can get nice, pretty charts. You can see them as the histogram that's in the middle left there. Really to be able to compare in Australia how, I guess in our case, how vulnerable is my area compared to other areas. And we can display things like temperature on this. We can display the intermediate ABS parameters, all sorts of things. So the idea is to give users a very quick insight into what data we're displaying, and then they can immediately see some impact there. Cool. So in terms of challenges, just giving the brief overview of what I'm working with and now what we've got to work with in terms of data, the two main things are imputation and aggregation. So we'd like to be able to display this data as fine as possible, both temporally and geographically, but there are some limitations to that. A pretty serious set of key limitations is the census data availability. We're using, for our vulnerability indices, 2011 to 2019 data, and that doesn't quite line up with census data, and we'll see that in a moment. But trying to figure out how to deal with, if we want to display a year's vulnerability, for example, how do we deal with, say, 2014's data where there's no census data collected and very limited other ABS data? And I've got some solutions there. We've got to employ effective imputation methods, just deal with missing data and try and find methodology that can skirt around that, or just reduce our temporal extent. And rather than displaying, say, a yearly vulnerability index, display one vulnerability index. And then there's aggregation. So in this sense, the census data is actually quite good because it's available at a really fine geographical resolution of SA2, and they've also got it in a separate ASGS standard of LGA, which is local government area. So that's quite good. But we're dealing with some exposure data, say temperature at surface level, that is fine grid level data, and some similar quality air data. So there are all these kinds of challenges when we're combining data together. And I mean, it's unlikely that we'd ever get ABS census data at the household level, but in a dream, that would be great. Cool. So I just wanted to end on a data availability kind of visualization here. I couldn't quite find a nice, pretty color scheme, so hopefully this is nice and striking enough. But what I've done is just prepared some of our ABS census data and other ABS data, plotted the years that it's available in this nice, vibrant green, and the years where it's not available in a black. And the light green sections are areas that we'd feel comfortable imputing based on limited variability in the census style parameters, i.e., the number of rented dwellings isn't likely to fluctuate an insane amount between 2011 and 2016. So we're happy to kind of plot the general linear trend, for example. But there are other data in here, which maybe we'll talk about a bit later, that it's also collected by ABS, maybe some years, maybe not other years. For example, crowded dwellings right at the top, that I guess we can't do anything with. In the case for crowded dwellings, we've got one data point. It'd be really unfair to apply that one data point for all of history that we've got. And in other cases like median income or the number of people who own mobile homes, it's unfair to kind of extrapolate back or forward outside of the data range. It's not going to paint a nice picture. So those kind of challenges are very raw. And I guess the more data that ABS collects, the better it looks. So yeah, I guess I just wanted to finish with that. Great.
That's wonderful, Aidan. Thank you so much. And it really brings home the magnitude of the work that needs to be done from the point of measurement through to the point of production of the actual statistics, through to the subsequent analysis and interpretation and meaning there. So that's really impressive. I would like very much for this webinar to extend for at least another hour so I can ask all the questions that I've got. That's not going to happen. We're going to have to wrap things up reasonably soon. But I'd like to come back with a question for all of you. And Mark, I'll start with you. Is like, when you're thinking about, you know, say the next 5 years or so ahead, what's top of your list of sort of like challenges and opportunities with respect to the sorts of things we've been talking about today?
Yeah, it's a good question. Top of my mind, I mean, if I think about the logistics of the census, there's a number of things that I could talk about there, but I think what I'd rather talk about is the way we do a census in Australia. It's not to say that we're going to change that, and it certainly takes longer than 5 years to change how we would do a census, because we are actually already planning the next census before we execute the current one. And as you said, it's like a rocket launch, and you have to line a lot of things up. It's, you know, the largest sort of peacetime logistics operation that we do, although I'm not sure if the vaccination rollout gives it a run for its money in current times, but you know, usually that would be the case. And so I would think about, well, what are all these other data sources coming online? What do we have access to that can replace or effectively inform the nation, and things like this that could be sourced more regularly than a census? The census is hugely expensive. It's an impost on the population. It does have a whole lot of value attached to it, but we want to make sure that that investment is best bang for buck, asking the right questions that can't be accessed from other places and through other things. So I think we need to keep a real finger on the pulse of what data people can get from other places and bring that together, and how we should integrate that, how we should work that with our census and the other statistical sources in, you know, surveys that we run to inform efficiently and regularly. And so I think they're the challenges that are ahead for the ABS in the census space.
Yeah, that's really, and I think that speaks to what Gentry described about the, you know, partnership with that academia there. So Caroline, from your point of view, apart from getting a nice Christmas present, which helps you deal with all the data coming in on the 23rd, what's on your list of challenges and opportunities for the next 5 years?
I think it is about getting meaningful data that can be used by the people who need to use it at the right time. So I think it does touch on what Mark's saying about the various data sources that are around, and really defining what is the purpose of a census. What can you collect in the census that you can't collect elsewhere? So we know that administrative data and other big data sources provide a lot of information. You can get a lot of, say, estimating population based on things like Medicare, electoral roll, and other sources. But really critically thinking about, well, if we're going out and spending a lot of money doing the census, what can we actually ask people, and how can we do that? And not just, I guess one thing is, how can we ask people the questions that they want to answer, that they feel are meaningful, but are actually meaningful back to the policymakers? And there can be a bit of a divide between that, because a lot of people are really personally invested in the census and they want to see themselves in it, which is fabulous. And then, but how is that also meaningful? So I think there is quite a balance that we need to take about what is meaningful data.
Yeah, I can imagine that there are some tricky things to sort of juggle there. Gentry, from your point of view, in your list of challenges and opportunities, and you've got to put yourself off mute, by the way. So what would be top of your list at the minute?
Yeah. Oh, listen, back to what Mark was saying, or getting at, is really the question is, you know, how can we do more with what we have and more with less, essentially, which is always the question. And actually, one of the PhD projects that is being funded and supervised partially by ABS is actually looking exactly at the problem that Mark was talking about, was how can we use other data sources to improve the accuracy of the census data, or improve the accuracy of other data. You know, this was a problem I worked on in graduate school, was essentially how can we replace expensive survey data with some kind of sampling data, and can we get the same results, and how do we do that in a way that makes sense and makes the best use of what we can get. So that I know that's, but that falls under sort of this broad heading of, you know, how can we get better information out faster?
Yeah, I can see that theme emerging. Aidan, I'm curious from your point of view. That's quite an agenda for AusN Health. But you know, speaking personally, what would you say is top of your list in terms of challenges and opportunities?
Yeah. I think there are plenty, and I think there are plenty of opportunities data-wise to take what we've worked on, I guess, in this past period and really extend it to be a huge resource for the population and for government and policymakers to be able to see these vulnerabilities and, as we hope our goal is, to intervene. With the census-based data, it's seeing what other kind of population data we can get our hands on. A very obvious immediate one is the new census data that will come out, I guess, next year. That's going to be quite an exciting set of data to assess and see how that works with all the rest of our data. But yeah, looking forward, I guess it's really diving in and doing a deep assessment of population demographics that really shape vulnerability and trying to make the most of the data that we've got available in Australia. I'd say that's the biggest opportunity and challenge.
I'm glad you're on the case, Aidan. Look, so we've hit time and I'm going to wrap things up, but my respect and admiration for the panelists who are working with these data sources and addressing the challenge of making sense and gathering national statistics has only increased over the course of the last hour. And I just wanted to say a very sincere thanks for your time, your insights, and for all your efforts in delivering positive impact from data science. It's really wonderful. I would like also to thank the Queensland Academy of Arts and Science and the Queensland University of Technology Centre for Data Science for initiating and hosting this seminar series. So Data Science in the News is an ongoing series that looks at what's topical in the news with the data science lens. So stay tuned for future webinars on our website, Twitter, which is @QUT Data Science. A special shout out to our colleague Becky Cook for technical support and brilliant work behind the scenes. And also a special shout out to Amy Rawson, who's helped us greatly in running this series previously and today is moving to a new role in QUT. So I wish you all a great weekend. Thanks for being with us today. I'm David Lovell. Until next time, go well. Take care. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.